as in all webinars, we have two ways to connect with us. We have a Q&A and a chat box. And while we're getting started, just while we're getting the doors through, if you'd like to just tell us where in the country you're from, it would be really nice if we understood. So in the chat box, just tell us where you're from. And we start with Essex and Reading, and where else? We've got Bristol and St Albans, just so we get a flavour of where you are in the country. Cornwall and Buckinghamshire and Cambridgeshire. We'll start in, somebody from the New Forest, which is my part of the world. Belfast, we've got Suffolk and Ely and Scotland and Kent and Coventry and Derby. Oh, and somebody in Portugal, I notice. We've got Lancashire and Donegal. So basically from all over Britain and Ireland, and potentially from Europe as well. So we'll just let everybody stabilize just a few minutes, get an idea of who's standing, then I'll introduce who are here today, and we will start in about 2 minutes, I would think. Oh, we've got somebody in Edinburgh and Bath and now Norfolk. I hope it's as sunny and nice it is wherever you are in the country today as it is nice down here on the south coast. I mean, I'm near Portsmouth and it is a beautiful day down here today. So hopefully it is a nice day from everybody else. I'm not going to try and say the Welsh for the national park because I will make a complete mess up of it. Welcome from Wales and Reading and Fife. Okay, all over the place, which is, oh, I'm sorry it's not nice in Devon. Grey and drizzly, that's a bit sad. But I guess that's what's coming. Right. I think numbers are stabilizing and most of you are, many of you are here, so we will start. So hello everybody. My name's John Stokes. I'm Director of Tree Science and Research at the Tree Council. And today we've got one of our National Tree Week webinars celebrating and explaining about the importance of heritage trees, ancient trees, and the work that lots of organisations are doing at the moment to try and better protect and better look after those trees. And I am joined, a great pleasure to be joined by two friends of mine who work also for organisations. I have Adam McCormack, and now I've forgotten in advance. I asked them what their job titles were because I don't ever think of their job titles. I'm joined by Adam McCormack, who is head of campaigning at the Woodland Trust, and by Emma Gill-Martin, who is the senior technical officer at the Arb Association. But we three meet regularly to talk all things trees and ancient trees. And what we're going to try and do today is give you a flavour of the range of things that are going on in this space, just so that you're up to date on how we all think and the importance we all place on important and special trees. So I'm going to go first, and I have the privilege of doing a little scene setting. So Adam and Emma, can you see that? Okay. So as we said in the introduction, we're talking about particularly heritage trees and ancient trees and what lies ahead for them. And just so that you're aware, the Tree Council is the umbrella organisation for tree groups across the UK. We've got four ranges of activity that we do, from community action, young learning, practical science and research, and partnership power. And it's in this last category, partnership power, that the work we're talking about today comes about. And of course, it's National Tree Week. And National Tree Week is the celebration of tree planting across the country. This one I put in on the left. It's where the organisation, the Tree Council, started from. Plant a tree in '73, and if you're old enough to remember, I'm sure you're all far too young to remember. I know Emma is to remember plant a tree in '73. But for those of you that are old like me, plant a tree in '73 was how they started National Tree Week, and it's embarrassing but true. This is me with the first tree that I planted back in 1973, meaning that I've been hooked on this journey of trees for the best part of 40 years now, as we all have been collectively, and National Tree Week is a core part of that. But organisationally, the Tree Council's journey with ancient trees started with this particular one, the Llangernyw Yew. And the Llangernyw Yew was a tree that we discovered on a tree warden training day in North Wales back in about 1994. And when I say discovered, the reason for the discovery was that nobody had really spotted it as something important. There was a lot of visits to pubs on the way to it. We visited a whole range of pubs and other churchyards, and eventually found this remarkable tree in the village of Llangyrnu, which had one of the biggest girths of any of the trees in the country, nearly 44 feet in circumference at the base, much larger higher up. But so unregarded was it as a tree that they'd put the oil tank for the church right smack in the middle of it, which was leaking and dripping oil into the center of the roots, the center of the tree. And it started a whole thought process which said, you know, there are trees out there that are as old as Stonehenge, and yet they aren't or weren't legally protected or even necessarily regarded at that point in history. Whereas one of the famous people in this field, Ted Green, has always said, this pile of man-made stones is legally protected, but a tree of the same age wasn't. And I think Adam's going to come on to that later. So we started to think about how we could change that perception. And it was coming up 6 or 7 years later, the Queen's Golden Jubilee appeared. And so we decided, rather than plant some new trees for the Queen, that we would give her the top 50 trees in the country. And we got our tree warden volunteers from around the nation to vote for which trees they thought were the most important. And they voted for these 50 trees, and we gave them all plaques, and we called them Great British Trees. And we, of course, went back to the Llangyrnu Yew, having got rid of the oil tank because we'd persuaded the church to move the oil tank, and we'd paid for the movement of that. We gave these trees this status of Great British Trees, which was lovely. There was 50 of them around the country, and we got plaques, and we started that journey. And we discovered all sorts of really fascinating trees that I hadn't heard of. My still favourite tree that we discovered through that process was this one, the Bewdley Sweet Chestnut, a tree of enormous, impressive size and girth. It's in somebody's back garden. It is a very big back garden, but it is a big back garden. And the branches stretch out nearly 90 feet in any direction. It's really amazing tree. And we realized that we'd found this vein of interesting trees. And of course, those trees have all sorts of values and benefits to the nation. And this is a lovely drawing that was done by Hannah Rigdon of Natural England. And thank you to Hannah for letting us share this. And it just shows some of the values that these important trees have for beauty, for genetics, for carbon sequestration, for just artistic inspiration, for a whole range of things. These trees are important. And it started us on the journey of exploring this possibility of these trees being part of our heritage. I had the privilege of writing a couple of books with some of my friends and colleagues, Donald Rogers and Archie Miles and Edward Parker, some of the great photographers of trees. And we produced some books on these special trees to document what they were like. And we will come back to this picture, which is the front cover of the Scottish book in a little bit later. And we then set about, nearly 20 years ago now, celebrating these important trees. And one of them in the book was this one, the New Battle Abbey sycamore. And the New Battle Abbey sycamore was said to be the very first sycamore that was planted in the country. And it was said to be planted in 1550 in the front garden of New Battle Abbey. Now, I don't entirely believe that as a piece of story, because whether sycamore was introduced or planted is another story that we haven't got time to do today. But this was what was said of this tree. And we were featuring it as the launch of the Scottish book. And so we had we had the Scottish First Minister, we had all sorts of things lined up nearly 20 years ago for a launch event that was taking place at this tree. And we were sat in a restaurant about half a mile down the road on the night before, and there was a sudden and very violent gust of wind, which surprised all of us as we sat there eating our dinner. And when we arrived the next morning, it had fallen over. Well, not fallen over, it had been blown over by that gust of wind. And so we realized that not only are these trees important, but their management, aftercare, and their future was equally as important as celebrating them for what they were. And so earlier this year, we decided with the Woodland Trust that it would be really nice to go back to those trees and see what has happened to them over the last 20. And as it happens, Emma was then working at the Woodland Trust and Adam was there too. And between us, we decided that we would work out a process to go back and have a look at these important trees to see what's happened to them over the last 20 years. Because we really don't have a lot of understanding of that condition of these important trees. We don't know how many of those special trees we might be losing. And our understanding of the threats to some of these trees is frankly a little thin. So we decided it would be quite a nice idea to go back and do that. We then set about training volunteers who went out to look at the trees and to do assessments using information that I think it was Emma that put together. Was it you, Emma, that put this one together? Yeah, which was how to assess an ancient and veteran tree. We trained up the volunteers, we sent them out, we asked them to take photographs to compare with the original trees of 20 years ago. And then, because we just wanted to make sure that the volunteer feedback was accurate, we then asked an experienced consultant to go and have a look. His name's Chris Knapman, and he kindly went and had a look at all of the reports and did a sort of just a check that our data was looking good. So what happened? Well, some of the trees are basically unchanged, as you would expect. In the great lifespan of some of these trees, 20 years is next to nothing. They are still almost exactly as they were 20 years ago. And the picture on the left, 2004, picture on the right, 2024. So some, like this Scone Douglas, basically untouched. The Fredville Oak, another one. I defy you really to spot any difference between those two trees 20 years on, but you know, in an 800, 900,000 year old tree, 20 years is nothing. You wouldn't expect to see very much. And indeed in this one, we didn't. Now, to my surprise, some of the trees actually looked a bit better. And so this is the parent larch, and 20 years on, you can see it's developing a whole slightly thicker foliage, slightly thicker crown. Same day the photographs were taken, by about 2 days different earlier. But some of the trees have been looking better, and those trees have often had some form of management, something that's been done to them that has enabled them to look a little better over the 20 years, which is fantastic. And this one, the Queen Elizabeth Oak, I think is definitely one of those, which in 2004, when we did the campaign, they put a fence up around the outside of the tree to basically stop people from walking in and compacting the roots. 20 years on, I think that old tree is actually looking slightly better than it was 20 years ago, slightly more vigorous, which is fabulous because it means that the treatment has helped, has protected that tree over those 20 years. But not all of them have necessarily fared as well. And some, like the Burnham Oak, are now suffering with compaction around their base, with lots of feet have walked, and that's leading to a bit of decline. And of course, some of the trees have gone altogether, which is a great surprise and a tragedy. But the Pontfaddock Oak here was one of our trees. You know, it was huge in 1910. By 2012, it's still looking fine, but it blew over in the spring of 2013. And we come back to the front cover of the book. In 2013, 2004, it looked fine. And then some children got inside, had a campfire, set fire to it, and the tree became a chimney and it burnt down. So we have had some of the trees that have been lost. And the results of the survey were fabulous. Really interestingly, the volunteers and the consultant largely agreed on all of the state of the trees, which was good. It meant the volunteers were giving the same opinion as an expert, you know, to a very, very large degree. And what we found was that tragically, nearly a third of the trees that we've looked at from the books are at risk or have been lost since we wrote those books. Now, that's a third of the trees in 20 years is a really high percentage and causes problems. We haven't yet shared the list of those. The analysis of this has literally only been done. in the last couple of weeks. So we haven't yet been to the owners of the trees that are on the critical list, but we will be going back to talk with them to see what we can do to help to get these trees in better shape. There are a whole range of threats that are impacting the trees, from compaction to shading and all sorts of things. And there are slightly more of those impacts in the threatened and critical and lost trees than in the secure ones. But in the secure ones, there are still problems. So even though they might be secure, they aren't necessarily there forever unless we start to think about it. And the problems that are major are things like compaction, shading, damage and cutting inappropriately. These are things that are causing problems for our trees. Sorry, I forgot to remove those two. One of the other things was that we discovered when you looked at legal protection, although some of the trees, only about 41% of the trees are protected by any sort of legal protection, it doesn't appear that legal protection is the solution, because the trees that have, whether they had legal protection or not, wasn't impacting on their levels of protection. So what this teaches us is that we need to have more of a thought of stewardship going on in the owners of some of these trees than necessarily about the legal protection. In parallel to that, we've been doing some work, this is Tree Council have been doing some work for DEFRA, and we were asked by DEFRA to review the legal protections and financial supports of our trees, and we consulted experts, and we've explored all sorts of policy developments that can happen. We've met with over 50 different organisations during the course of the summer from a whole range of landowner types and stakeholder places. And what the key findings of that research are is that to address the threats that these trees face, we've got to have a range of different actions. We've got to look at the legal protection, but because the stakeholders all said they don't adequately recognise the full range of values of the trees, we need to look at funding and resource and constraints to see how we can give support to the owners and land managers, and particularly the local authorities who are dealing with their conservation and protection. We do need to think again about legal protections and designations. There are things that we can learn from abroad, and I know Adam's going to refer to this in a second. But frankly, what we seem to need to better protect our best of the best is a bit more of an active stewardship approach, where the owners realise that they are these things need a little bit of management. It's not just about preserving them in the aspect. We need to look after them. And to do that, we need to have some training and guidance that will help owners and managers to look after them. All of that has been summed up in a report that went into DEFRA this week, and there are recommendations or there are suggestions in 7 areas that we think we can work together to better do regulation, policy, resources, more research and awareness, collaboration and skills. And that report went in this week, and we're awaiting feedback from DEFRA very soon, we hope, and we'll tell you more the moment we have any. So that's where we've got to, and the summary of all of that, both the DEFRA work and the Heritage Trees Revisited, is fundamentally there are some problems for these trees: compaction, storms, poor tree surgery. We can manage those impacts if we have the resources to do it. We need better understanding of the survey and evaluation, and the legal protection that we've got probably needs some tweaking to enable them to be better protected, and that is better than no protection at all. But I thought I'd end with a sort of shocking picture that shows the summary of why all of this matters, particularly to me. This is a tree I found one day while standing at a petrol station, filling my tank, idly looking over the fence, and thought, oh, that's a splendid tree. Then went and had another look, realised it was a truly splendid tree. Got ill, was off sick. 6 months later, before I'd had a chance to talk to the owner, I came back because I'd got sick, and I stood there idly filling the petrol tank again and realized that the tree had had that done to it. And when I went to talk to the owner, they said they were just tidying it up a bit to make it, they hadn't intended to kill it, they just didn't know better. It has died. It hasn't died through malice, it's died through inappropriate knowledge of what was happening. And that's the sort of thing that we have to deal with if we're going to protect our best trees going forward. And so I'd like to then now introduce you to our next two speakers who are going to explore a little bit further some of these issues. And Adam's firstly going to tell us about what the Woodland Trust have been doing in this space over the last few years. So Adam, over to you. Before I do that, if anybody has questions for any of this, please put them in the chat, and at the end we will have time for some questions that we will take in the round. So Adam.
Thank you, John. I'm just sharing my screen. Can you just give me a thumbs up, John, if you can see that?
Yeah. Oh, no, not yet, Adam. No.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, now we can.
Good stuff. Okay, thank you, John. So I'm just going to give everybody a quick update on the work that the Woodland Trust has been doing for the past few years, but very much in partnership with organisations like Tree Council, Arb Association, Ancient Tree Forum, on campaigning for better protection for our oldest and most special trees. So I've been running a campaign called Living Legends that some of you might have heard about. So I'm really just going to show you some of the work we've been doing in that campaign. So what were the aims? So back to that phrase John was using, active stewardship. That's how we've been defining the goal, really, in terms of what we want to inspire. It's about active stewardship of our most special trees. And that boils down to three key things. One, which is about legal protection, which is very much tied to the valuation of those trees for people. Number two, consistent policy protection, because these trees occur everywhere, all types of land use. So having really good wording in planning policy isn't enough on its own to drive the kind of protection of all these trees. And then support for the people who own the trees. So origination point for me is this article by Ted Green. This is really a long-term campaign that many people have been running, and we're standing on the shoulders of people like Ted, Jill Butler, and others who have been kind of driving these ideas forward. And John and Tree Council's work in the early noughties, which is around the same time as this article. So 2001, Ted was asking the question someone put in the chat a minute ago: should ancient trees be designated as sites of special scientific interest? And you can access that article online via British Wildlife's online archive. It's worth a read. But really, we're trying to answer that same question now, kind of 24 years later. So I'm just going to show you a few of the things we've been doing over the past 3 years, because what we've been really trying to do is draw together our advocacy work for these trees into a kind of coherent campaign where we can demonstrate public support and start putting forward a better case for change for these trees. So we started in May 2022, and the first thing we did was a partnership project with the Nature Friendly Farming Network, looking at the relationships between farmers and the old trees on farms. So I'm just going to show you a few of the outputs of that project quickly. So basically, we had this amazing vintage camera that a member of staff from the Woodland Trust had, our staff photographer, Phil. That I can't remember the precise name of it, but basically you have to stand very still for about 30 seconds in order for the picture to be taken. It's like an old plate camera. Takes these fantastic, they're like art, really, the photographs you get. So we went out, and the concept was to photograph farmers and then their trees sort of side by side. And there's some stuff online where there's more of the storytelling about the trees. So this is Andrew, who's got a farm in Rutland, and this is the Bomber Oak, so named because a Lancaster bomber crashed into it during World War II. So there's a whole load of local stories around this tree. So that's Andrew and his tree. This is Frida and her hornbeam. This is Ed, his oak tree. It's Chris, veteran pear tree. I mean, I love these photos. They're one of my absolute favourite things we've done in my time at the Woodland Trust, because I think they start to get into the relationship between people and trees. So in a minute, we're talking about policy and data, but I think for me, this is the humanity of tree protection. It's that relationship between people and their trees. Cat and the badger oak, this one, the kind of fallen oak on Cat's Farm and Dartmoor. So we did that. Then, well, Emma and I went to Poland along with some colleagues from the Woodland Trust to look at last summer to look at the Green Monument Schemes. This is a legal protection scheme. It protects 32,000 old and special trees across Poland as green monuments. There's a little plaque that goes on the tree, and this is us next to a big poplar tree in Warsaw, in a park right in the middle of the city. And this is a really good example of that concept of active stewardship. So the tree, it's a really old tree and it's absolutely huge. It's immense. It's like a vast sort of totem pole. And there were some concerns about the kind of stability of the tree. So the city council had kind of rerouted some paths further away from the tree and effectively given the tree some space in the park to just kind of get on with its thing. And it was a good, it was a good kind of illustration of that idea of active stewardship. There was a kind of prioritization for the tree. They knew it was a green monument. They knew that the tree, needed some space. Here's us meeting an MEP and talking about tree protection rules in Poland. Isn't that a great mural? I love it. So we kind of met some charities that were working on trees in Poland. And this is us next to one of the oldest oak trees in Poland, Miśko, on the outskirts of Warsaw, with the arborist Piotr, who looks after it. And you can see from the picture, this tree is like a museum of arboriculture. So there's kind of this concrete in there from mid-20th century. There are these big iron kind of bands around parts of the tree, and then a prop that's kind of on the far side of the tree. And here's Piotr showing us a sort of diagram of the tree, the kind of functional unit that's still alive, the bit in green, and there's a little 3D printed tree from the kind of digital artwork. And we came back from Poland with lots of ideas and inspiration really from what they'd done. So another part of this campaign has been about gathering evidence. So we've been doing some data analysis on trees within the Ancient Tree Inventory, the citizen science project that the Woodland Trust runs in partnership with the Ancient Tree Forum and the Tree Register. So we've been looking at land use to just try and understand where these trees are located. So we've been looking at a subset of trees in the ATI. There's about 200,000 trees listed in that inventory now. So we've been looking at the trees of national and special interest, about 14,000, very sort of, I guess you could say, the kind of oldest and most special. There are two key messages that came out of this work, really, which I think we would have probably had a hypothesis about these beforehand, but we wanted to do the data analysis to really establish, in fact, whether this was the case or not. The first is that most of these trees don't lie within protected designations, so things like SSSI, special areas of conservation. So most trees are not on land that's protected. They occur in all kinds of land use, gardens, churches, parks, road verges, some within SSSIs, of course, but mostly not. And also most aren't within woodlands. And I think that idea that you can kind of group ancient woodland, ancient tree protection together, I think this data really shows that they need different solutions. There's, of course, some overlap, but most of these trees are outside forests and woodlands in the UK. And we've done a bit of extra analysis on the farmland types that these trees occur within. So it's showing us that most are on grade 3 land when we're looking at those kind of different types of farmland. And about 30% in kind of built up areas and areas that are non-agricultural, and 19% within ancient woodlands. So we also did a bit of work looking at ownership of the heritage trees, the trees that were in the books that John was sort of showed us in his presentation. And again, this starts to dig into the detail a bit of that kind of mixture of ownership and where these trees are. So this is showing us that the majority of those heritage trees are on estates. Church is the second biggest owner, and then after that there's a kind of real mix, which is about local government, private homeowners, charities, farms, etc. Coming back to that idea of how can what solution would give you consistent active stewardship in all these different types of land use? I think that's a real challenge, but one that we're really trying to kind of lean into here. So the other bit of evidence we've been gathering is examples. So John showed us a couple of shocking photos. So one of the kind of byproducts of running a campaign like this is you get examples of kind of trees that have been damaged. So fantastic veteran oak tree there on the left-hand side. Unfortunately, this happened, which is that this tree was effectively excavated to be moved for a swimming pool. So good example of kind of undervaluing of the tree. And then this is a case from Reading, the Caversham oak. So this tree, an application was put in to remove this sort of circa 700-year-old oak tree, which was eventually rejected. But I think, again, probably not coming from a place of malice, like John said, but coming from a place of really underappreciation, maybe undervaluation, or just not really knowing what the value of a kind of being like this. So we've also done some public polling with YouGov on public attitudes to protection. So this shows us, maybe not a surprise. Most people support this idea of better protection and that kind of heritage status for our very oldest and most special trees. And we did, so obviously we were running this campaign before the sort of depressing felling of the sycamore gap tree last September. And so we went back and asked the same question, ran a rerun of the poll a couple of weeks after the felling. And we saw this kind of upswing from, I mean, there were already a lot of people who agreed in it, but even more so, I think the felling of that tree really kind of focused public opinion. And there it is. So final thing we've been doing is a bit of work. So Emma's going to talk mainly about this tree in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of make the point of working with King's Ely School, who have the Great Plain of Ely in their grounds. And we did some work connected to Heritage Open Weekend, which is something we've been wanting to do for ages and ages. We have this weekend when people go and visit castles, museums, celebrate heritage. Why couldn't we do something about trees on that weekend? So this year we did with the school. That's us just giving a bit of sense of the scale of the tree. And here we go. So we welcomed a few hundred people over the course of the weekend. There was a fantastic art exhibition that the school put on. They'd a couple of months earlier in the summer, people had come and mainly painted the tree. Over 20 different artists put all that artwork together. Fantastic exhibition. But people got a chance to walk around and visit the tree. And I'll let Emma talk more about this fantastic tree and some of the work that's being done at the moment to try and conserve it. So final thing then, so this is a photograph from last week when we handed our Living Legends petition in. We've just reached 100,000 signatures. So we wanted to take that to Westminster, and you've got Sarah from the Tree Council, Darren from Woodland Trust, got two MPs. Person holding the box is Charlie from the Woodland Trust Youth Council. And we've got David Oakes, actor, some of you might recognise, who's been a really good champion for ancient trees, and then a few other folk in there. So we're going to leave our petition open, so you can still go online and sign it, but we wanted to kind of do a hand in now to kind of try and build up some momentum. And we got to talk to the one of the advisors in Downing Street about this, and sort of briefing after we'd handed the box in. So if you sign a petition, thank you. This is what we do with them. We kind of ask you for your support to kind of demonstrate public support for things like this. These kind of big changes for trees and woods. And then final thing then, two private members bills, which is really moving now from a campaign about the sort of, I guess, the values and that idea of better protection to more specific detail about what that could look like. So there's a Heritage Trees bill, which has been proposed in the House of Lords by the Woodland Trust's previous chair, Baroness Barbara Young. So you can just go online and read this. So that's had its first reading last December. It's currently sitting in a pile of bills that have had a first reading. It will now need the government to take it forward. And that's about promoting the protection and stewardship of heritage trees in England. And you can go on, it's a fairly short bill, like a framework. It's about making a list of trees, the protection regulations. And a consultation opened yesterday for a similar idea in Northern Ireland, tree protection bill. Peter McReynolds is the MLA who's proposing that. It's Peter there on the right-hand side. And I think in a minute in the chat, we'll pop a link in for that. There's a consultation, SurveyMonkey questionnaire. So if you're based in Northern Ireland, please complete that. And if you've got any advice that you want to give to people in Northern Ireland proposing this, you can do that via that survey too. So John, that is me, sort of 15-minute tour through what we've been doing for the last 3 years. Time to hand over to Emma.
Fantastic, thank you. Somebody's just asked what's happening in Scotland in that space. There is also a consultation out for Wales at the moment, who are also looking at legal protections. Kaylee will put the details of that in the chat in a second. I'm afraid I don't know if there's anything particular going on in Scotland at the moment. Adam, Emma, do you've heard anything?
So what I can say is we're going to be doing a hand-in of the petition to Scottish Government as well. So we did that at Downing Street. There's going to be a hand-in of the Living Legends petition and signatures in each of the UK countries. So we're currently talking to the team in Scotland about when that's going to happen. Yeah, so that's one thing I can say now.
Yeah, I don't think there are any changes necessarily on the planned at the moment. But again, it's all building, which is the
Yeah,
important part.
this is long-term work, I think. So, there are things in different kind of places in each UK country at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Adam. So at this point, we're going to move on to Emma, who's going to talk from the Arboricultural Association's point of view about some of the practicalities of protecting these trees when you actually want to do some work on them. So Emma, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? See my
We can.
slides?
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anna, and as John said, I'm joining from the ARB Association, where I'm a senior technical officer. I'm going to provide, or I hope I can provide, a slightly different, very complementary view as compared to what Adam and John have already spoken about. If I may just indulge myself, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself so you can understand my point of view. I've been really lucky in my career to have been able to enjoy and work with old and special trees since I left school, basically. So I started out researching the ecology and the natural processes involved with old trees and decay, like this tree here. And then I went on to work for some time as a specialist at the Woodland Trust, working on best practice and on the Living Legends campaign that you just heard about. But now I work to raise awareness of the tree care profession. I work to improve standards in arboriculture, and so today I'm going to talk to you about arboricultural practice, which you could just simply call tree care. Because many people don't realise that most of the trees that you drive past on your daily commutes, that you encounter in your everyday life, are usually planted, maintained, assessed, protected by tree care professionals. So these are people primarily concerned with trees outside woodland, the trees delivering the shade in your town centre, the beautiful blossom that you see from your window, the ancient monuments that stand in your local churchyard, and of course, all of our heritage trees. Now, this industry, this specialism, is a relatively young one, and it's still growing and developing. The association itself is only 60 years old, so the profession is young, but it's a great one to be in. So I'm pointing this out because we just heard that some of the threats to our tree heritage is poor tree management, and I'm sure this rings true with all of you who are interested in trees. The trees are not like us, are they? They bear their whole history in their bodies. They wear their scars on their bodies, so we can see historic evidence of maybe unnecessary, overzealous tree work. And I find it so interesting to see old trees showing what we would call now very outdated practices. And so they're a record of tree work in that sense. But I'm convinced that poor practice is really in decline because as an industry, we're very committed to learning, to sharing our learning, and to developing a really valued profession and an evidence-based practice. But there are reasons why poor tree management isn't disappearing as fast as it should. So as a professional body, we can certainly be supported to make things better faster. For example, anyone at all can call themselves a tree surgeon or a tree expert. This is an unregulated industry and it can be very difficult for a homeowner or a tree owner or a concerned citizen to find a skilled professional and distinguish them from a person who has simply bought and can operate a chainsaw. So one of the things that we've been doing as an association is to help provide recognition to the experts. So the association is the UK Exam Centre for a European scheme called VetCert. This is a big success story for us and for tree care in general. And VetCert is a wonderfully tough exam. It's a way for veteran and heritage tree specialists to demonstrate their expert knowledge and their experience. So the exams and the standards were launched across Europe in 2019, and there was a little pandemic related hiccup, but now the scheme is gathering momentum. And I manage the Vet Cert scheme in the UK, and I can report that we now have over 60 certified specialists in consultancy and practitioners, and they can all help us to ensure the best possible future for our oldest and most special trees. So if you are procuring advice on trees that are special, you should consider using professionals that are Vet Cert. Excuse me while I wait for my slides. I just want to introduce to you, because we don't have a lot of time together today, just some ideas about what good tree care looks like. So a shout out is due to the Ancient Tree Forum, who have been a community of enthusiasts working for over 30 years, and a lot of progress on this has been thanks to them. First, tree care is about understanding the values of the tree. Is it the tallest, the oldest, the most mysterious, or of exceptional ecological value? So we must understand the importance of the tree and be able to articulate this. So it helps us to be clear about why we're managing, what are the objectives of our management, and realise when we've got maybe conflicting goals or desires for the tree or the site or the community. These are the amazing lapse pollards of Epping Forest as an example. Now, pollarding was very important here on the edge of London, but these pollards have not been cut for about 150 years now. So the trees are both fragile and top heavy. They're a really tricky management challenge. So in places like Epping, people try really hard to balance the values that these trees provide, strike a balance between the ecological and the historical and the cultural value. Second, tree care is about knowing when and why to do nothing at all. So to their credit, trees are really quite good at living, growing, staying alive for a long time all by themselves. So we always must start with the option of doing nothing and then weighing the pros and cons of that approach. Next, we should manage the land around the tree if that will help us to secure it for the long term. So this is one of the biggest oaks in the UK. You've already seen it this morning. The Majesty Oak, it stands in a private garden, and probably we don't need to touch the tree at all. Probably the advice would be to manage the competing vegetation around it to maintain the light that is so essential for long life and reduce the competition from neighbouring trees and vegetation. This is a good one because it illustrates how the world has developed around important trees and then caused problems for the tree and then for us too. I don't normally like to talk about trees that I don't know. I haven't met this tree, but it's the crouch oak in Surrey. It's perched there on the roadside, and Surrey Council appear to have had success in recent years by achieving more space for this tree. And what they've actually done, can't see it here, they've narrowed this road to achieve more space for the tree. So much credit to Surrey Council. Finally, we might decide that we do need to manage the tree itself. So to give an example of this, I'm going to tell you about a current project with the London Plain of Ely. And this tree features in the original Great British Trees book and the Heritage Trees of Britain and Ireland. And John's already spoken about that series. It was planted in around 1674, so it makes it around 350 years old and believed to be one of the earliest UK London planes, which is a hybrid species. So here on the left, over 100 years ago, and on the right this year, where it stands now in the grounds of a school. And David Day, who is the chair of governors at King's School in Ely, is leading a project to conserve this tree. As it is in the grounds of a school, they have a duty, indeed all tree owners have a duty of care. They must take a balanced and proportionate approach to minimising the risk from trees to students and visitors alike. So because some concerns were raised about the stability of one of these enormous trunks and the condition of the wood around an old wound, David basically sought all of the advice he could from everyone he could meet, and get the advice on what needed to be done, if anything at all, with the Ely plane. And David has been this isn't David, you'll see him in a minute. David's been instrumental in pulling together this range of expertise from different disciplines to arrive at a good course of action. And it's that collaboration that I know will, lead to the best future for this tree, that we all know is of national and indeed international significance. So I'll just tell you about what happened earlier this year. So we basically invited our Italian friends to help us with the tree assessment, and this is Giovanni inspecting the tree from a mobile platform. There he is inspecting on the left-hand side the limb of concern, or the trunk of concern, and you can just about see a probe, or maybe it's his saw, in the crux between the two trunks. And this is the cavity that he was inspecting that was originally flagged as being particularly weak. So let's see what happened. So here's David waving as he was able to go up and see and hear the assessment of the tree as it was happening. I won't spoil the ending because the work isn't done and it's David's story to tell. But the tree is in pretty rude health, actually. There was no action to be taken on those original concerns. But however, there was some historic cabling, some supporting structures installed in the crown, and you can just about see them in the top right-hand corner of the right-hand picture. These were installed from the 1940s onwards, and we can't remove them, but they do need to be replaced next year. So David is currently running a fundraising campaign to enable this work to take place, and hopefully that fundraising page has been shared in the chat. Since 2005, then, the government has had a policy called Keepers of Time, and they refreshed it in 2022. In it, they stated a vision for ancient and veteran trees that are 1. Appropriately protected, 2. Sustainably managed in a wider landscape context, and 3. Providing a wide range of social, environmental, and economic benefits to society. I think I've got that right. It is well beyond time that these adequate policies and funding and human resources were developed to realise that vision, and I am still hopeful for that. In the meantime, there are many of us living and breathing these amazing heritage trees. We're doing all we can to care for them with the resources we have. Here are some of us just last month in Italy. We visited a 100-year-old cypress in the monastery of St. Francis. And there we were learning from our friends and colleagues, deeply, deeply jealous that in Italy there are annual regional budgets available for the care and monitoring of what they call monumental trees. Adam has already mentioned that we found the same was true when we visited Poland. If only we could achieve it here. Okay, that's me. Thanks for listening.
And that, thank you, Emma. And that is the subject of the future, isn't it? How do we get to the place where we can get these trees on the same par as they are in other countries? We have 10 minutes left, and we have lots of questions that people have been posing. So I'm going to start us with a few of the questions. Thank you both for the presentations. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to pick up on an easy one that David Appleton has put in, which is, are we looking to change the rules around TPOs so that tree doesn't have to be just visible to meet the TPO criteria? And that, as you can see from Emma's nods, that is one of the subjects, David, that we're all exploring, how we can look at any of that legislation to see what the grounds might be for, because at the moment the phrase is the tree has to be of amenity value. That isn't very clear as to what that might mean, and therefore has some flexibility which is positive but may not be as useful as it could be. So it's certainly part of the conversation going forward to look at how we might redefine some of those words. And if you want to feed into the Welsh, and Irish things that are in the chat, it might help you. It might help if we have that conversation across the nations, because it will start to lead to the wider discussion. Adam, Emma, do you want to have anything on that one?
The only thing I would add quickly, John, is in Poland and in Italy, and I think Romania, which is another country that has a legal protection system, it's about multiple values. So not just amenity, so it's about ecological value, cultural value, historical value. And I think you're kind of triangulating between those values in many cases when you look at these trees in the UK as well as the other countries. And in the Heritage Trees bill that I mentioned, there's a proposition in there for a heritage TPO, which is a sort of TPO that is more geared towards active stewardship rather than a kind of defense mechanism for trees under threat in urban areas. Because I think there's some things that TPOs do effectively, but they're not really designed as conservation tools to drive that active stewardship.
Okay.
So yeah, lots of thinking going on that.
There's a question from Chris Paget that says, although he understands why I mean, I'm paraphrasing Chris's question. He says basically, although he understands why we're doing the work on the ancient ones, there's a whole cadre of trees that are 200 or 300 years old, and how do we do better protection for that next generation of trees? You know, either of you want to start with that one? Emma, me?
Adam, do you want to talk about the Claylands work?
Yeah, I could. Do you want to say whatever you want to say first, Emma, and then I'll mention that in a minute.
No, that was the first thing that came to mind, that we know that,
So
you know,
you'll notice, Chris, the fact that we haven't answered you means, in a nice, concise way, is that this is a subject of great intellectual discussion around the country. How do we actually get to a place where we can foster the next generation of heritage trees? How do we do that? And that idea of future heritage trees is one that we've been exploring for a while, but I don't think we've cracked that one any better than we have the idea of protecting the really ancient and important ones yet. I think it is a work in progress, but it is completely and utterly vital that we do crack it, because unless we have the next cadre of trees coming through, then you aren't going to ever get to the place. And certainly in it wasn't the example that these two were referring to, but in Norfolk, one of the things that gives trees a bit more of a personality than it's just a tree is if you can't start to give it a name. It's really daft, but psychologically, if you start to refer to a tree as with a name, give it personality and features, it has worked. And in Norfolk, they did a whole campaign about 10 years ago where they started to give trees local names, just to bring the ones that mattered out into the open, to make them talking points, to make them conversation pieces. And that did lead in Norfolk, has led in Norfolk to that next cadre of trees having a lot more attention given to it than they might otherwise have been. So just naming a tree might be as an important part of giving it some levels of protection. Anything you two want to add?
Yeah, I'll just say Emma mentioned some work that we've done looking at the first epoch ordnance survey maps. So these are the maps from sort of 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, looking where individual trees were drawn on. I expect there's people on the call who are familiar with these maps. They're very beautiful and they have individual trees marked on them. So we did some work in an area in Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex, looking at comparison, how many of those trees were still here now. We found that about 50% had been lost in the intervening 150 years, including about 85% of infield trees, about 50% of kind of hedge trees, and then slightly less of the kind of copses and groups of trees and field corners and things. So it's showing us that these trees are disappearing from the landscape. So that's a kind of area of predominantly arable farmland in eastern England. I think when we went to Windsor last year and we looked at the kind of succession planting near some of those ancient oak trees where they're grafted, sort of the next generation. And I think, you know, John, a minute ago, you sort of talked about these very, very old and special trees as almost the vehicle through which you can talk about wider tree protection and tree valuation. And I think there's a logic to that makes sense to me, which is if we can't protect a tree that's 1,000 years old properly, how can we protect one that's like 20 years old? So it's about trying to inspire a culture of tree appreciation and valuation probably starting in the place where it should be most straightforward and trying to get our house in order there. But I think there is ways of protecting white trees, a wider cohort of trees through policy as well, which you can improve the kind of rules for tree care that way a bit as well. John's looking very thought. Ah, there you are, John. You're back.
My line fractured at that point, Adam. I'm so sorry. You made the point earlier in the presentation that a lot of the trees that are important are outside the woods, but some of the audience are saying that the trees, some of their really important ancient trees, inside woods as well. And one of those people is Anne Wilson, who, and I think it's the Anne Wilson. I think it is. If it's the Anne wilson, I think it is very concerned about some remarkable ancient lime trees in a wood called Piles Coppice in Coventry, which is one of the most remarkable places I've ever seen of ancient lime trees. And this is a wood where management conversations leading to the possibilities of damage to some of these trees is a really hot topic. So although we need to conserve the ones outside the woods, there are often some in the woods that we need to think about. And Anne's just telling me on the chat here that they are being felled. So there's some conversations that we need to explore, not only outside the woods but inside the woods as well. David suggested, there was a suggestion from David Appleton again. No, it's not that there's only David who's asking questions. It's just he's happened to catch my eye. But the idea of having grade 1 listed, grade 2 listed trees, David, is one that we are is at the heart of a lot of these conversations that we are all having in this space. We have time for a couple more, but not many more. Tim Stevenson raised questions about best practice for ivy management on important trees, and this is a topic that is still not quite resolved, I don't think, in terms of what we do and what we should do with it. Emma, have you got any views on that one?
Overall, I would encourage no blanket approach to ivy management, so take it on a case-by-case basis. Some of our old trees really do need light, especially towards the base of their towards the base of their trunk rather, in order to reorganize themselves and grow downwards, as the phrase is often used. So sometimes ivy can interfere with that, but as it's also of incredible ecological value, ivy, part of the wider ecosystem. So take each tree as it comes.
Adam, anything from you on that one?
No, I'll go with Emma's advice on that.
Okay. There is an awful lot of conversation about ivy in trees, and always has been. I think it was Linnaeus who said in 1750 that if he had a pound, or it wasn't a pound then, but it might have been a pound, for every time. No, sorry, brain. My brain is fuddled today. What Linnaeus said was he couldn't understand why the British had such an obsession with ivy and saw it as a problem, because he didn't, right back in 1750. And if I'd had a pound for every time ivy comes up in conversation, it would be I'd be a really rich man by now. But it is definitely, on some trees, it can become a particularly problematic thing. And funnily enough, we were asked by DEFRA only the other week whether there could be some development of some guidance in that place. So hopefully, we haven't got an answer for you yet, Tim, but hopefully we'll come back to that subject at some future point, I think, because there are some really interesting things to go on there. We are against time, I'm afraid, folks. There are so many questions that we'll have to look at them and see if we can come back to you all with some writing following this. But there was one comment that I would just like to close with. Emma, another Emma, said of you, Emma, that she thought it was really quite sweet that you talked about meeting a tree rather than visiting a tree. And I sort of smiled at that, because for those of us that have done this long enough, we all think about meeting these trees, don't we? You go and meet a tree, you don't go and visit it, you don't go and you meet it. So it's that bit about getting familiar with, becoming friends with those trees because they matter to you. I think that is the heart of the battle. And for the tree wardens that are out there that said, could you have some better guidance, better information on how you can do something in the space of looking after, passing on good advice? What I will take to do following today is Adam, Emma and I will come together and see if we can have a discussion about some information we could put out into the public that might help for those of you that want to take some active role in doing something positive for the trees in your community, because it's certainly something that if you think we should do, we should do. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry that has been a gallop through an awful lot of information. We will try and give you, there is a recording, and if there are things that you want, follow it, do get in touch. It is an active piece of work that we are all engaged in, looking at how we can protect these better trees. And it's been 20 years since I wrote those books, and 36% of them are now threatened, which is not great, but what it does is it spurs you to greater efforts and greater activity, because you realize that we haven't solved the problem. We're in the middle of trying to get something done. So thank you all for your time today. We will be continuing. We value your support and interest in this subject. And we hope that we will see you all somewhere soon. So thank you for joining us. Take care, everybody. Have a happy end to National Tree Week. And if I don't see you again this side of Christmas, I hope everybody has a nice Christmas. And we start the new year looking at better tree protection for all of us for 2025. Thank you all so very much for joining us. Take care.